Madeline Carter had spent most of her adult life pretending she was fine. At 29, she had become an expert in disguise. Smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes, cardigans that draped past her hips, and polite conversations that never went too deep. She worked quietly as an archival assistant in a historical society in Asheville, North Carolina, tucked between the Blue Ridge Mountains and her own internal walls. To most people, she was the girl who always had a book in her bag, who declined after-work drinks, and who never missed a deadline. But no one knew she avoided sitting for too long. No one knew about the hot packs hidden in her desk drawer or the bottle of ibuprofen she refilled every 2 weeks. Because no one knew what it was like to live with the kind of pain that hums beneath your skin like a secret. It had started in high school, sometime between junior prom and graduation. At first, it was just discomfort. Then came the pressure, the dull, throbbing ache, and the sting that never quite left. Her doctor called it a mild case of hemorrhoids, handed her a brochure, and sent her home with some over-the-counter ointments. She never told anyone, not her best friend, not her older brother, not even her mother, especially not her mother. Mrs. Carter was a proud Southern woman, the kind who wore lipstick to the grocery store and believed privacy was dignity. She loved Madeline deeply, but saw emotions as something best dealt with behind closed doors. So Madeline learned to do just that. She learned to keep her pain quiet. She learned to endure it in silence, always waiting for it to pass, always hoping it would go away. But it didn't. By her mid-20s, the pain had become a daily reality. She learned to decline movie nights. "The seats bother my back," she'd say. She stopped going to yoga. She even stopped dating after one boyfriend commented, half joking, that she was a little high maintenance when it came to comfort. He never knew how deeply those words cut. They weren't cruel, just careless. But careless was all it took. Over time, her world became smaller. She built her life around her pain, creating a version of normal that allowed her to function, but never to flourish. She timed bathroom breaks. She memorized which chairs in the building were softest. She wore black pants always, and she avoided doctors, terrified of what they might find, and worse, how they might treat her. The idea of exposing such a private part of her body, of being reduced to a clinical case number, was unbearable. So she lived like that, quietly, carefully, invisibly, until the night she woke up on her bathroom floor, shaking from pain, tears streaming down her face, her palms pressed hard into the tile like she could hold herself together through sheer will. Something inside her cracked. Not just physically, emotionally, spiritually. She realized that the real fear wasn't just about the pain itself. It was the fear that this was it, that this half-life she'd built around her condition was all she'd ever know. She sat at her kitchen table that morning, wrapped in a blanket, and typed "colorectal specialist near me" into the search bar. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded, but she didn't close the tab this time. When she clicked on Blue Ridge Digestive Health Center, she didn't expect anything remarkable. It was just another clinic, another form to fill. But something made her pause. The doctor's bio, Dr. Nathaniel Blake, spoke of dignity in treatment and compassion over judgment, a throwaway phrase for some. For her, it was everything. That same day, she submitted her intake form online. But before clicking submit, she added a single line to the comment box, typed with trembling fingers, "Please don't laugh. I just want to feel normal again." She didn't know if anyone would read it. She didn't even know if she'd show up to the appointment. But it was the most honest sentence she had written in years. And it was the beginning of something she never expected. Not just healing, but hope. The clinic was quiet when Madeline Carter walked in for her first appointment. A soft jazz instrumental played over the speakers, too calm for how her stomach was twisting. The walls were a gentle shade of sage green, the kind of color meant to soothe. But nothing could touch the storm inside her chest. She had almost turned around twice in the parking lot. Only the memory of the pain, raw and humbling, kept her moving forward. That and the single-sentence plea she left in the appointment form. "Please don't laugh. I just want to feel normal again." At the reception desk, she could barely speak. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Madeline Carter, 9:30 a.m. The receptionist smiled warmly. "We've got you, Miss Carter. Dr. Blake will see you shortly." Would you mind filling out this short form? She slid over a clipboard and a pen. Madeline nodded, her fingers trembling as she scribbled through the questions. She didn't make eye contact with anyone in the room. She didn't want to see pity or curiosity, or worse, recognition. A nurse called her name a few minutes later, and she followed silently, hugging her oversized cardigan tighter around her frame. They moved through a softly lit hallway, and the nurse's voice was kind but practiced. First time here? Madeline nodded. We'll just get your vitals and review your file before Dr. Blake comes in. Any previous surgeries? Madeline froze. The nurse glanced up gently. It's okay, just answer what you're comfortable with. We want to make sure you feel safe and supported. She barely got the words out. No surgeries, just discomfort. For a long time. The nurse nodded without judgment and finished the check-in quickly. Doctor, Blake will be in shortly. Alone now, Madeline sat on the edge of the exam table. Her hands clutched the sides. Her knees were drawn slightly inward, an unconscious shield. She stared at the closed door, her mind spinning in a dozen directions. Maybe I could leave now. Maybe I could say I changed my mind. Maybe this is a mistake. She had expected an older man, someone clinical, aloof, someone who would speak in the sterile terms and barely meet her gaze. So when the door opened and a tall man in his late 30s walked in, wearing dark gray scrubs and a soft expression, her breath caught. He didn't carry a clipboard, just a calm, grounded energy that filled the room instantly. Good morning, he said gently. Madeline, right? She nodded, unable to speak. I'm Dr. Nathaniel Blake, but please just call me Nate if that feels more comfortable. She blinked. He wasn't what she expected, not just in appearance, but in presence. His voice was warm but measured, like he understood exactly how fragile this moment was for her. I read your intake form, he continued, pulling a small stool close and sitting at her level, and the note you left. I want you to know I'm really grateful you shared that. Her heart hammered. He smiled softly. I promise, this room is a safe space. No judgment, no embarrassment, just honesty and care. She felt her eyes sting, but blinked it away. I know this isn't easy, he said, so we're not going to rush anything. We'll just talk for a bit, and if at any point you prefer to stop or have someone else, like a female doctor, I'll make that happen. No questions asked. Madeline looked at him, really looked, and something in his face made her stay. There was no condescension, no discomfort, no trace of the smirks she'd feared for years, only understanding. Still, she whispered, just don't look at me like I'm broken. Dr. Blake paused, then nodded. I won't, because you're not. The room went still. It wasn't a rehearsed line. It wasn't some polished bedside manner. It was real, and for the first time in a long time, Madeline felt seen. They talked for almost 20 minutes before anything remotely medical was discussed. He asked about her work, her hobbies, her routines. When she mentioned her love of historical biographies, his eyes lit up. My mom was a history teacher, he said. She used to read me stories about the Underground Railroad instead of fairy tales. Madeline smiled, her first real smile in days. Eventually, he gently guided the conversation back to her symptoms. He listened without interruption, asked a few clarifying questions, then stood. All right, assured, he said. If you're okay with it, we'll do a quick external check today. Nothing invasive, just enough for me to get a sense of what's going on and build a care plan that works for you. She nodded slowly, still nervous, still vulnerable, but not alone. As he stepped out to give her privacy to change, Madeline sat there, one hand resting on her chest, trying to name what she felt. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it wasn't shame either. It was something quieter, something steadier, hope. Long before Madeline Carter ever sat in a doctor's office trying not to cry, she had learned how to disappear. It began when she was 12. Middle school was unkind to soft-spoken girls with anxious eyes and a body that didn't quite cooperate. While the other girls giggled over lip gloss and locker notes, Madeline was the one who sat with her knees clenched and her hands fidgeting, trying not to wince when the plastic chairs pressed too hard. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Maybe you're just sitting too long, her gym teacher said when she asked to skip exercises involving squats. Her pediatrician chalked it up to growing pains and recommended more water, but the discomfort grew, slowly, quietly, like a shadow. Then one day in 7th grade, during a group project, she shifted in her seat and gasped, just a little, but loud enough. A boy turned and asked, "You okay?" Before she could answer, someone else muttered, "Maybe she's got butt problems." It wasn't said with malice, just amusement, but that was all it took. The nickname stuck for the rest of the year. Madeline the Hemorrhoid Queen. She never corrected anyone. She just stopped talking. She stopped raising her hand in class. She avoided gym altogether, collecting excuse notes like medals. She brought a small cushion in her backpack and claimed it was for scoliosis. By 8th grade, she had learned how to fold into herself. Shoulders rounded, voice lowered, presence minimized. She wore oversized sweaters, always. Black leggings under every skirt, hair down to frame her face. If she couldn't be invisible, she'd at least be unreadable. At home, things weren't easier. Her mother, a widow who ran a small accounting business from the dining room table, loved her daughter deeply but dealt in logic more than emotion. She wasn't unkind, just busy. Always working, always tired, always practical. One time, Madeline tried to bring it up. The pain, the embarrassment. She circled around it in the most careful way she could, using vague phrases like discomfort and "I think something's wrong, but it's probably nothing." Her mother didn't look up from her laptop. "Sweetheart, if it's nothing, then don't stress over it. You worry too much as it is." So Madeline said nothing more. When she was 17, her mother passed away suddenly. A brain aneurysm. Gone between breakfast and lunchtime. Madeline didn't cry at the funeral, not because she didn't care, but because by then she had learned that feelings were inconvenient, and no one was coming to catch them if they spilled. She moved in with her Aunt Helen, a warm but distant woman who believed in privacy above all else. Helen let Madeline be quiet, let her retreat into books, let her skip church on Sundays and keep to herself. It was the safest Madeline had felt in years, but safety wasn't connection. In college, she majored in history, not because she loved dates or wars, but because old stories felt safer than current ones. They had a beginning, middle, and end. People didn't get interrupted in the past. They were studied, preserved. She avoided dorm parties, skipped orientation mixers, and never told a soul about the pain she still carried. She learned how to live around it, chose seats near exits, declined road trips, dated once, briefly, but ended things after the second time she flinched when he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "It's like you don't even want to be touched," he'd said. She didn't know how to explain that it wasn't about him. It was about her body, about the constant low ache, the unpredictability of her pain, the way her skin screamed when pressure hit the wrong spot. And more than that, it was about shame, because somewhere along the way, she'd internalized a belief she couldn't shake, that her pain was gross, that her condition made her unlovable, unworthy, and broken. So she stopped hoping, stopped imagining what it would be like to live without fear or discomfort. Her dream life became modest, maybe a quiet desk job, a small apartment, bookshelves full, no questions asked. Maybe she'd get a dog, something that loved her without expectation. She wasn't angry at the world, just tired of feeling like she didn't belong in it. Until that night on the bathroom floor changed everything. When she typed that message into the clinic form, "Please don't laugh. I just want to feel normal again." She wasn't just asking for compassion. She was daring the world to treat her like she mattered. And when Dr. Nathaniel Blake looked at her that day, met her shame with calmness, her fear with steady eyes, something fragile inside her stirred. For the first time in a long, long time. She wondered if maybe she wasn't the problem. Maybe the problem was the silence. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to break it. The morning of her surgery, Madeline stood in front of her bathroom mirror, hands trembling as she braided her hair. She'd done this 100 times before, but today even the simplest task felt foreign. Her reflection looked pale, eyes hollow from a night of little sleep. She'd packed her small overnight bag the night before, even though it was just an outpatient procedure. Extra socks, a paperback novel, lip balm, comfort items for a body that hadn't felt comfortable in years. As she rode to the clinic in the back of a rideshare, Her fingers traced the stitching on her bag. Her heart pounded with each passing streetlight. She had come this far. But now, it felt terrifyingly real. This wasn't like making an online appointment or filling out a form in the middle of the night. This was exposure. This was trusting a stranger with the one part of herself she'd spent a lifetime trying to hide. When she stepped into the lobby of Blue Ridge Digestive Health, it felt like every sound was amplified. The clicking of the receptionist's keyboard, the hum of the ceiling lights, the quiet flip of pages from another waiting patient's magazine. She checked in quietly, barely lifting her eyes from the floor. "Doctor, Blake would like to see you in his consultation room before we prep you," the nurse said, smiling gently. Madeline blinked. "Is something wrong?" The nurse shook her head. "Not at all. He just prefers to speak with patients personally for more sensitive procedures." She nodded, following the nurse down the hallway that already felt too bright. The consultation room wasn't like a typical medical office. There were no harsh fluorescent lights, no metal trays, just warm wood tones, a few potted plants, and a single window where sunlight filtered through sheer curtains. There was even a faint scent of lavender, not antiseptic. Dr. Blake stood near the window, wearing a dark gray hoodie over his scrubs. He turned when she entered, his expression soft. "Hey, Madeline, thanks for coming in early." She didn't speak. Couldn't, really. Her voice had retreated somewhere into her chest. "I know today's a big day," he said, motioning for her to sit. And not just medically. She eased into the chair across from him. Her hands gripped the armrests like she was bracing for turbulence. "I don't want to be dramatic," she whispered, "but this feels like the hardest thing I've ever done." Dr. Blake didn't flinch. He nodded slowly. "It is hard. You're not being dramatic. You're being brave." They sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "Have you ever laughed at a patient?" His eyes met hers with steady calm. "No," he said without hesitation. "I've laughed with patients, like when my mom beat her chemo milestone and insisted on dancing in the hallway in fuzzy socks." He smiled faintly. "But I've never laughed at someone's pain." Madeline's breath hitched. She hadn't realized she'd been holding it. "You asked me not to look at you like you're broken," he continued. "And I haven't. Because you're not. You're just someone who's been carrying pain alone for too long." She stared at him. This man who barely knew her, but somehow saw her, not as a file, not as a diagnosis, but as a person. "I don't think it's disgusting," he said, voice steady. "I think it's human. And I think the shame around it, that's what's tragic." Her chest tightened, but not from fear this time. From release, like something deep inside her was finally loosening its grip. He stood and extended a hand. "We'll take good care of you. When you wake up, this part, this pain, will be behind you." She stared at his hand for a beat, then slowly placed hers in it. It was just a gesture, simple and small. But for Madeline, it felt like crossing a bridge she'd been standing on the edge of for years. The operating room was colder than she expected, but the staff moved with calm precision. The nurse who adjusted her gown asked how she was feeling. "Terrified," she admitted. "That's okay," the nurse said. "Terrified people are often the strongest ones." As the anesthesiologist prepared the IV, Dr. Blake appeared beside her again, eyes kind, presence grounding. "You're not alone," he said, and for the first time, she believed it. She closed her eyes, the hum of machines fading into the background. Not because the fear was gone, but because something else had taken its place. Trust. Recovery wasn't magical. It wasn't quick or pretty or linear. There were mornings Madeline Carter woke up feeling hopeful, the pain already noticeably less than it used to be. And then there were others, gray, heavy days when she lay curled on her side, wondering if anything had truly changed. The stitches itched. The swelling lingered, and even though the worst was behind her, a strange kind of emotional ache rose in its place. It turns out, when pain has been your shadow for most of your life, its absence leaves an odd emptiness. At her first follow-up, 1 week post-surgery, she sat stiffly on the exam table, trying to manage her expectations. Her walk from the parking lot had been slower than usual, each step careful. When the door opened, Dr. Blake stepped in, wearing a soft navy pullover over his scrubs. He gave her a quiet nod. "How are you holding up?" he asked, pulling up a stool. She shrugged. "Sore, tired, but better." "That's honest," he said, smiling. "And it's exactly what I hoped to hear." The checkup was quick and professional, but what surprised Madeline most was that he didn't rush. He didn't act like a man juggling 20 patients in a day. He listened, asked about her sleep, her appetite, even if she was still able to focus at work. It was never just about the incision site. It was about the person living with it. At the end of the appointment, he paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Take it slow," he said gently. "And remember, healing isn't a race, it's permission." She didn't respond right away, but something in her chest tightened, in a good way. The second follow-up was more comfortable. She brought her own cushion and sat a little straighter. When Dr. Blake walked in, he glanced at the paperback on the chair beside her. "The housekeeper and the professor," he read aloud. "That one'll sneak up on you." Her eyes widened. "You've read it?" "Twice," he said. "It's short, but it lingers." She smiled. Not the small, hesitant kind. A real one. They didn't talk about medical charts right away. Instead, they talked about books, about favorite quiet places to read, about the difference between solitude and loneliness. And somewhere in between stories and sutures, something unspoken settled between them. A growing ease, like a space where both of them could breathe. By the third visit, Madeline noticed herself doing something she hadn't in years, looking forward to seeing someone. Not in the giddy butterflies in stomach way, but in the calm, steady kind of way. The kind where you start to realize that maybe, just maybe, someone sees you and doesn't want to change a thing. Dr. Blake remembered the details she didn't expect anyone to recall. He asked how her co-worker's knee surgery went. He remembered she took her tea with lemon and no sugar. And once, when she mentioned that rainy days made her ache more, he'd said, "I keep a heating pad in my office too. You're not alone in that." Those little things, they mattered. They made her feel seen. One afternoon, after a routine check-in, she lingered by the exit longer than usual. Dr. Blake was walking her out as always, clipboard in hand. But this time there was a pause. "I meant to ask," he said, glancing at her tote bag, "is that a new book or an old favorite?" "Old," she said, cheeks warming. "I reread a lot. They're safer. Books don't change on you." He looked at her for a moment, thoughtful. "You know," he said, "I think people can be like that too, if you give them time." She didn't know how to respond, but her heart tucked the sentence away like a bookmark. That night, Madeline sat at her kitchen table, journal open in front of her. She hadn't written in months, not since before the surgery. But now the words came slowly, honestly. He listens, not because he has to, but because he wants to. "I don't know what to do with that kind of attention." She stared at the sentence for a long time, then underlined it. Dr. Blake never crossed a boundary. He was kind, present, but always professional. Yet there was something in the way he spoke to her, as if he wasn't seeing a patient recovering from something shameful. He was seeing a whole person learning how to exist without shame. By her fourth visit, she was laughing, out loud. Something about a misprint on the aftercare instruction sheet. Something about a typo that turned follow-up appointment into falling up ointment. He'd shrugged and said, "Well, I guess we're reinventing gravity now." It wasn't a grand moment, but it was hers. The kind of laughter that comes from the chest, not the mask. And that day as she left, she caught herself touching her reflection in the clinic's elevator mirror. Not to fix her hair or check for flaws, but just to look. To remember what she looked like when she wasn't hurting. It took Dr. Nathaniel Blake 3 weeks to write the letter, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew exactly what it meant. He had drawn the line so carefully between his duty and his heart, and now he had to cross it, gently, respectfully, honestly. Madeline Carter had made remarkable progress. Her physical healing was nearly complete. She walked more easily. She smiled more often. She looked him in the eye now. But that wasn't what stayed with him. It was the way she listened without needing to fill the silence. The way she sat with her emotions and didn't apologize for them. It was the way she had shown up scared, but stayed. He couldn't pretend anymore that his care for her had remained clinical. And so, quietly and without fanfare, he did what needed to be done. He reassigned her to another physician in the practice, wrote a thorough handoff note, made sure every detail of her care would remain uninterrupted. Then he sealed an envelope. Inside, on a single piece of thick paper, he had written in his careful handwriting, "Madeline, you are no longer my patient, which is the only reason I'm writing this. I didn't want my care for you to ever be confused with obligation or ethics or policy. What I feel for you has nothing to do with a chart or an oath. It's not because you needed me. It's because somewhere along the way, I realized I needed you. Not the healed version. Not the version that finally smiled or looked me in the eye. Just you. If any part of you feels the same, if there's even a small place in your heart that wants to be seen, not as a patient, but as a person, I'll be here. No scrubs, no clipboard. Just me." Nate. He left the envelope with the front desk and asked them to hand it to her at her next appointment. When Madeline read it, she sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, heart pounding. Then she folded it carefully and slid it into her jacket pocket, like something sacred. She didn't know what to do with the feeling swelling in her chest. It wasn't giddy, it wasn't storybook. It was real, grounded, terrifying in the most beautiful way. That evening, after the library closed, she walked, not drove, to the clinic. The sidewalks were quiet, the sky dusky and pink. She took the elevator to the rooftop garden, a place he had once mentioned as his quiet space. When the doors opened, she saw him standing by a row of potted herbs, watering a patch of rosemary. His back was turned. She spoke softly, voice just above a whisper. "I got your letter." He stilled, set the watering can down, but he didn't turn. "I didn't expect you to come, he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I'm still figuring things out." Now he turned. Their eyes met under the soft string lights that crisscrossed the rooftop. There was no soundtrack, no applause, just the hum of traffic far below and the sound of her breath, uneven but steady. "I'm not perfect," she said. "I still flinch when someone looks too long. I still panic when I feel seen. But," she stepped closer, "if you still want to read with me on quiet nights, if you still want to sit with me on bad days and not fix anything, then I think I'm ready." He didn't speak. He just stepped forward, gently took her hand, and held it. Not as a doctor, not as a savior, but as a man who had waited. "I've been ready," he said. A year later, Madeline stood at a small podium inside the community library where she now worked full-time. Behind her was a new section she had designed herself, a corner with soft chairs, gentle light, and a simple wooden sign that read, "The Healing Shelf." She looked out at the small crowd, neighbors, friends, a few former patients who knew her only by the calm in her voice. In the front row, Nate sat with his hands folded and his eyes steady. "I used to think healing meant never hurting again," she began. "That if I was brave enough or quiet enough, maybe the pain would go away. But healing isn't about erasing the hard parts. It's about being seen, even while you're still healing." She looked at Nate. "It's about being loved, even when you're not finished yet." And this time, when the applause came, she didn't shrink from it. She stood tall, because finally she had chosen to be seen. Some pain doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't show up on x-rays or draw sympathy from others. It lingers quietly in our backs, our hearts, our memories. And over time, many of us, especially as we age, learn to live around that pain rather than through it. Madeline Carter's story reminds us of something powerful. Healing doesn't start with medicine. It starts the moment someone truly sees you. So many older adults know what it's like to be dismissed. We're told, "It's just part of getting older," or "You're too sensitive." We're encouraged to push through the discomfort, to stay quiet, to be grateful it's not worse. And after a while, that silence becomes a habit. But Madeline taught us that silence isn't strength, it's survival. And there comes a time when surviving just isn't enough. When what we really need is someone to look us in the eye and say, "You're not broken. You deserve to feel better." Dr. Blake didn't perform a miracle. He didn't cure Madeline with a dramatic gesture. What he did was far more meaningful. He stayed. He listened. He didn't look away when she was at her most vulnerable. And in that safe space, Madeline didn't just heal physically, she found the courage to let someone in. There's a lesson in that for all of us. Whether we're the ones carrying hidden pain or the ones in a position to care for others, we all have the power to make someone feel less alone. You don't need to fix anyone. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give is your full attention and your quiet presence. So wherever you are in your journey, whether you're still hurting, beginning to heal, or learning to speak up for yourself, remember this: you don't need to be perfect to be loved. You just need to be seen. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. Stay with your pain, stay with your truth, and let someone stay with you too.